What's going on, everybody? Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and whatever time it is. Welcome back to another video with your man, Majorholic. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another faction overview for the Divided Impera Overhaul mod for Total War Rome 2. Today, ladies and gentlemen, we're checking out Pergamon. Obviously, you would have seen it in the title. Many of you have been requesting Pergamon for quite a while now, and so I thought I would deliver. I was planning on doing another barbarian faction first, but since we just covered the Scythians and they're kind of close to it, I thought I would do Pergamon since we've had so many requests for it. Next up, however, it will definitely be some sort of barbarian. It'll probably be one of the Iberian tribes, if not one of them, then perhaps one of the Gallic nations. So please leave your suggestions down below. I do try to consider them all, but I also try to spread things out from week to week, so we go from, like, say, Greek to Eastern faction to nomadic to barbarian or Germanic and Celtic, whatever. I try to mix things up, but yeah, keeping that in mind, please leave your suggestions down below. And before we do jump in, I do just want to throw out a reminder to you guys that this is just a faction overview. This is not a detailed review of every faction in the game. Hence, I cover the general information for you and give you guys some general tips and tricks on each faction, and just give my overall input on them, and I try to inform you on what to expect when you play in the Grand Campaign, or in any other campaign for that matter, as these factions. So if I do miss any details, I hope you guys don't take any offense to that. I'm not really trying to be too picky with what I say. I'm just trying to give you guys a general idea. So if I miss something you feel like is important, please comment it down below so I can share it with others. More than happy to pin comments or whatever. But yeah, just if you have any information you feel like should have been mentioned, comment it down below. Just please be constructive in doing so. But it is the internet. But anyway, guys, thank you for listening to me. Now let's get on into the faction overview. So of course we're going to start off with checking out the buffs and debuffs for Pergamon, and then we will jump into the part 1 section of this video where we check out the campaign situation for Pergamon, what things are for them on the Grand Campaign map. After that, we have the part 2 section where we check out the military and the navy, basically the overall military of the faction. And then in part 3, I'll give you guys a verdict on the faction. Are they good? Are they bad? As in, are they difficult or are they easy? And what kind of campaign can you expect, along with some final few tips and tricks to get you started on your campaign. So anyway, let's check out the buffs and debuffs for Pergamon. Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen, so as you can see, we are part of the Polis Hellenicae cultural group for all of the nations. Basically, we are part of the city-state, Greek city-state cultural group. We share the following perks with Athens over here, Sparta over here, and then Rhodes. We share the Greek knowledge perk, which gives us plus 5% research rate. Isn't all that much of a perk. I mean, it's helpful, but you probably won't notice it too much in your campaigns. But it's probably one of those kind of perks where it's like, it's helpful, but it's not really going to stand out. You're probably not going to notice it all that much in your campaigns, in my opinion. You may or you may not if you really pay attention and you're really a min-maxer when it comes to things like research. It might be helpful to you. But anyway, you share that perk with those factions. In addition, you also share the classical heritage perk, which gives you +2 to cultural conversion. This will be very helpful to you, but only +2 is monumental, but it is quite helpful. And it's going to be helpful because you're surrounded by other factions that are not part of your Greek cultural heritage, and as such you will need to try to put in a little bit of extra effort to convert the people to be a part of your culture. But then after you get past those initial factions, there are quite a few other Greek states around you, so it is helpful, but it might not be as helpful in probably the mid game. But the very early game and then the late game, I would say you'll see it being a little bit more useful. But again, it's a bit of another perk where you won't notice it overly too much unless you're a bit of a min-maxer. Then again, it will be quite helpful for you. However, let's look at the perks and the debuff that Pergamon specifically receives. So first off, they have the Great Builders perk down here, which gives a decreased building cost. Always a welcome perk to receive decreased cost for building things. Building things can be quite expensive, and depending on the submods you have, it can really make your economy struggle early on when you can't afford to buy specific buildings you need, like buildings that will give you better sanitation or better commerce or food. You really have to make some pretty critical decisions early on, depending on the difficulty in your submods. But even in a fairly vanilla DEI experience, it can be quite difficult for some factions early on to build certain things that they need. And so being a one-hitter quitter faction, Pergamon, you might see that be an issue for you, but this perk will help you out. Moving on from that, we have the Phil Hellenis perk, which is the diplomatic bonus with Hellenic factions. So in theory, you should have better diplomatic relations with other Greek factions. However, we will see how it's not necessarily the truth once we get into the part 1 section of the video. And then we also have the military Underdogs debuff, which increases your non-mercenary recruitment costs. So basically all units that are not mercs, so that means any unit that is an AOR unit, which is basically also known as a bit of an auxiliary unit, and anything that's part of your core roster will actually cost more than what it normally would. So that's kind of hinting that you need to be trying to use mercenaries a little bit more often. However, we'll talk about that a little bit more when we get to the military section of the video. But bottom line is, these are your buffs and debuffs. Overall, there isn't really all that much that stands out for this section for Pergamon. It's fairly balanced overall. You just have that kind of slightly annoying increase in cost for your basic troops, but it's not really going to be all end or fee. But anyway, let's jump on into the part 1 section of this video, where we will talk about the campaign for Pergamon. By the way, timestamps down below in a pinned comment. Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the part 1 section of this video, where we're going to check out the campaign overview for Pergamon. So instantly you can see we are a one-hitter quitter faction. We have one city here, Pergamon. Surprise, surprise. You have a walled settlement, which means it is the capital of a province, and the province being Asia here. You share it with Rhodes, Ephesus, and Pessanos, or Pessanos, however you want to pronounce that. And in addition, you also have a single army here in Pergamon. It starts off with just 4 units, including a general, all very basic. You have a spy down here in Ephesus, and that is it. You don't really start off with a lot. However, you do start off with a decent treasury, just like all the other factions do in DEI nowadays, with 21,000 denarii, or coins, however you want to refer to it as. You do need to ignore this amount of money here, in addition to a couple other things, because this is actually a campaign where I'm about 4 to 5 turns into the campaign, and I did that because I wanted to build a barracks so I could show you guys the population differences in the social classes and what it will mean for you moving forward. However, before we get to that, let's just cover your early position and talk about that a bit more. Like I said, you have a walled settlement here, which is very defendable. It'll be very nice for you should you have to fall back from the hordes of Thracians to the north, or the professional armies of the east. Pergamon itself will be very defendable for you, as long as you have a couple extra units in addition to your garrison. But on top of that, you only have really 3 main ways of getting in. One is over a river over here, which means it's very defendable. It's a river crossing. Use that to your advantage. In addition, you have a second river crossing down here on the south side of Pergamon. And then the other main way of coming in is from the east over here in the forest. You might have enemies coming in from the heartland of Anatolia, which isn't fantastic. However, you can really quite easily ambush armies up here. If we just hover over here for a second with the army, you have an ambush success chance of 70%, which is very solid indeed. It's a very good chance of catching the enemy army off guard, and that's just with the standard little crappy army that we have here. You could of course specialize armies to even increase that chance further. You do have this corridor down here that enemy armies can try to get around. However, they do still need to get over the river, which it doesn't look like that they can here. Let's just move this army out, just so I can double check. No, they can cross down here. But again, you could have an army hold right here, and then use that as a river crossing defense. But in addition to all of those geographical things, you also have no dock. You're not actually a naval faction, despite having a major city on a coastline. It's not connected to the ocean, and as such, you are landlocked. Which means a couple things. One, it means you'll have no naval units at all at the beginning of the game, but it also means that trade for you will actually be quite difficult early on. You'll only be able to trade with people who are right next to you, and you'll be wanting to declare war on most of those people so you can begin to expand. Perhaps not the Bithynians, but beyond that, the only other neighbor you have is Lydia down here, and you'll definitely be fighting them early on. So that is your very unique strategical and geographical position, which is very cool. It's definitely one of the more, I guess, comfortable positions you could be in strategically. It's not impregnable, but it definitely gives you a heads up over some other factions, such as Parthia having only a tiny little capital called Nisa, which is basically just a village, and you have to hold off hordes of Bactrians and other Persian factions. So that is going to be very rough for me in my Parthian campaign. But anyway, ignoring that. So what next? Diplomacy. Let's check it out. Like I said, I've been in this campaign for about 5 turns now, and as such, I've actually had 2 different factions declare war on me. The first one was Rhodes on turn 1. The second one was Athene on turn 2. Rhodes is a little bit random. I've done a few test campaigns as Pergamon, obviously, to check things out, and Rhodes hasn't really declared war on me before. I have no idea why they have now. I have no diplomatic ties to anyone, and they actually start off quite friendly towards you, so it doesn't make sense to me that they've declared war. But then again, the AI from CA in Rome 2 is very random, and even though a faction might really like you quite a lot, they can still have a chance of basically just flipping the switch and being complete dicks to you, which is one of the reasons why client states and military allies that you liberate often end up in you actually having to just wipe them out because they don't hold up to their alliances. But this is, I guess, a possibility, a little bit of an insight into what could happen for you. Now, the Finny declaring war on us, that's absolutely a given. They don't like you at the beginning of the campaign. They're a different cultural group. They're hostile, and they often do end up invading Anatolia. They are a Thracian group from Thrace, so do be careful of them and the Odrysian kingdom just to the north. They will be a very big issue for you if you leave them unchecked. So it might be worth trying to go conquer them, maybe use their settlement as a bit of a stopgap between you and the Dacians and other Greeks to the west. But yeah, that's our current political position. You start off with no other alliances or wars, though, and even though you don't start off with these 2 wars, it was just because I've gone through a few turns into the campaign. However, you are surrounded by factions that can be friendly towards you. You have Athens over here, you have Bithynia, you have the Seleucids, which are actually fairly friendly towards you at the beginning of the game. However, Lydia, while they do say that they are friendly, they will probably be your main enemy at the beginning of the campaign, which is not good because they're a satrapy of the Seleucids. Now, in saying that, even if you do declare war on them, the Seleucids aren't instantly going to send all their armies towards you. The Egyptians own territory right here, which can take quite a while for the Seleucids to take over, so it's not the end of the world. However, if you do wipe out Lydia, the Seleucids will be coming knocking on your door shortly after, so do be careful of that. So bottom line is, Thracians to your north don't like you, and you'll end up fighting Lydia followed by the Seleucids early on. That would be the majority of your early to mid-game campaign. Depending on how far east you expand, your late game could be you fighting Parthia or Bactria, or it could just be focusing on other Greeks and Rome to the west. It basically is up to you what direction you want to go. You want to go east or west. That's what it comes down to with that. But that's pretty much it for your diplomacy. Moving on to your economy, though. Your economy starts off in a very neutral position. Like I said, you are a landlocked nation, so you don't have any trading capacity, really. You can't really trade with nations that are far away from you until you take a settlement such as Ephesus, which is why it's so critical for you to try and take it and wipe out Lydia early on. But furthermore, you don't have any resources either. The closest resource to you is down here, which is marble, which is actually a decent resource, but beyond that, you don't have all that much for quite a while. Getting into like far eastern Anatolia and Armenia and such, they actually have gold out there among other resources. Syria and Egypt have pretty juicy resources, but they're quite far from you. Thrace has slaves, which are actually a very valuable resource, but they're over here, and you might not want to expand in that direction and open yourself up to enemies in that direction. Greece does have resources, but not a lot. And so early on, your trade is going to be fairly basic until you have a fairly sizable kingdom where you're really just basically trading with people all over the Mediterranean, which is what you want if you want a trading empire. But economy-wise, you're not in a bad position, but your good units are fairly expensive, which brings me to the unit discussion. So that's pretty much it for your economy. Basically, early game, it's not bad, but it's not good. You do need to be careful and balance things out. However, for your population, you have quite a few interesting things to discuss. And before I get into that, though, I will just note, this unit here, your Pergamine Pikeman, they have an upkeep of 224 at the start of the game. And they also cost 1,200, almost 1,300 to recruit per unit. That's a lot, because this is your core army unit if you want to have a professional army. So that just kind of ties into your economy. Do be careful with what you recruit. You might want to rely a little bit more on AOR Merc units. Speaking of which, you have quite a lot of options. I'm not going to go through them all right now, but I will give you the highlights, which will trickle into our population discussion. Pergamon has 35,000 people at the beginning of the campaign. However, 4,000 of them are from the Barbarian class or the Barbarian class, which is where you'll be getting most of your AOR units from, such as your very handy Carian Axemen. They are very, very useful, very aggressive, good at taking out armored units. Use them as much as you can. You can get a total of 8 units before the AOR cap kicks in. They'll be super helpful to you. And there will be other AOR units as you continue expanding, such as Galatians Tier East. But the other thing you need to note, though, is that if we look again at your population class, the Hoplites population class is only just over 4,500, which is not good, because the Pergamine Pikemen come from that social class. They should be the core of your army, and basically a 4,000 population means that you can basically afford 2 armies worth of pikemen, and I don't mean full 2020 stacks. I mean 2 armies of about 6 to 8 units each of these units before you run dry on that population class, which isn't good, because then you also have other units that use the same class, such as your fairly solid core hoplite units. Then you also have fairly cheap cavalry, Greek cavalry that's coming in the same population class. You do have other units. Where is it? Right here, you have Pergamine Peltis. It's a fairly basic Peltis as well, but they cost a lot, 1,000 each. They have a okay-ish upkeep of 175, which is kind of expensive, to be honest, for this unit. Although they do have fantastic melee stats. That's actually really impressive. Melee attack at 12. But anyway, they also come from the Hoplites social class. So basically, use your AOR mercenary units as much as possible. Which also brings me to the mercenaries available on turn 1. One of the biggest things about the Pergamon military roster is that you lack really good skirmishers, but turn 1, you have access to some of the best skirmishers in the game, at least in the grand campaign. Cretan archers and Rhodian mercenary slingers, they're fantastic units, and they'll be available to you, not necessarily in droves, but you'll be able to use them in at least your first main army, if not your second as well, pretty quickly. They are both very expensive though, so do be careful of that. But they also come from your Hoplites social class, so again, they'll be drawing basically from your core Greek social class of your society. So while you do have 35,000 people living in Pergamon that are recruitable, it is a little bit deceiving in that basically the core of your army is actually quite limited. So one of the things I've noticed while I've been checking out Pergamon is that I've struggled to find things to say that are bad about it. Often factions will have something that's very glaringly obvious that they struggle with. For example, Athens really struggles with good skirmishers and probably good cavalry, besides using the AOR merc units that are around them. Rome is an excellent example of that. They have fantastic heavy infantry, but they really lack in the skirmishing cavalry department. Pergamon isn't really so much like that, and I've actually struggled to find things wrong with Pergamon, except one of the early game things for you is population. It's not a massive issue, but if you don't pay attention to it, you'll be running out of armies pretty quickly if you don't manage them very well. But it's kind of hard to mess it up, I feel like, at least if you're a fairly regular DEI player. And now moving on to our final point in the Grand Campaign, this is a very unique thing about Pergamon. We're going to check out your king. You start off as a kingdom. The politics is always going to be random with the political classes that you have to deal with, so I'm not really going to talk about that at all. But I'm going to focus on your king. And now if you look right here, you might be able to figure out what I want to talk about. But in case you haven't figured it out, it is that he's a very, very old man. 64 years old. That's very old for the time period. He's basically on his deathbed at the time period. I know it sounds a little savage, but anyway, apologies to any of our older members watching, but for the time period, this is quite old. In addition, he has no wife and no children. So you might have a bit of a succession crisis very early on. Now, you do have a noble over here who's basically part of your political class or political faction, but he's not part of your dynasty. So you might want to go ahead and adopt this bloke and get him into your family. He's 19 years old. He's the general of your army in Pergamon. So it makes sense to try and recruit him to be your heir. But yeah, that's just one thing that I've never noticed before in Rome 2 being an issue, where you have issues at the beginning of the game with your faction leader being basically on the brink of dying. That's a very unique thing, and I really like that. I hope we see more unique things politically with factions as more updates keep coming out for DI and just Total War in general, really. Politics has always been a struggle in any Total War game, so that's a really cool thing. I'm not sure exactly what kind of issues it could lead installed for you, besides having a bit of a succession crisis, and as such you might have issues keeping loyalty with the other factions. But I mean, that's all also random as well. They could have perks that are absolutely easy to control, or they could have perks that are going to be a complete pain in the butt. These guys are all kind of just, yeah, they're not very good in their perks. They all hate certain groups. Xenophobic, hates barbarians. Thirst for power is never a nice perk. These guys are also bigots, so basically when you get trade relations with people, or any kind of relations, all these factions will be pissed off. But anyway, that's pretty much it for your campaign overview. Start off in a strong position strategically. Economically speaking, you do need to be a little bit careful. And population-wise, you could see some issues, but all in all, it's actually a pretty safe and solid starting position. But anyway, let's get into the part 2 section of this video, where we'll talk about the military of Pergamon. Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen, here we're at the part 2 section of this video, where we check out the Pergamon military roster. Now, first off, we're going to check out their navy, and then we'll jump on in to their military. Now, first off, you can see you actually have quite a few options in the melee department for your ships. You have a lot of different options here, and not only do you have options, but you have very good options. It's not as if you have like one god tier unit and then you have a bunch of really small pathetic units. It's actually very good diversity, and I mean so basically when talking about the quality of your units, and in addition to the quality of your ships. Now, the best ship you can get has a health of 2,000 with a crew of 180 Marines. These are very good Marines, definitely going to put up a very good fight, especially against the barbarian factions around you that do have navies. Basically, any barbarian faction that uses a navy is generally pretty terrible, except for the pirate style factions like Illyrians and Thracians and such. But like Celts, nomads, desert nomads, any of them who aren't really maritime powers, you will run over them incredibly easy, and you will give Rome a very good run for their money as well. Although Rome in the end does have a fairly solid navy. I won't go through every single unit here, but just briefly looking at these at a small glance, you can see you have low tier units, you have mid tier units, and then you have high tier units. And when I say mid and high and low and all that, I mean predominantly in ship health. Ship health is super important because ramming is probably the #1 way to deal with an enemy navy. And as long as you have high ship health, chances are you're going to do fairly well against the enemy navy. It's not always as simple as that, but when you're going up against the AI, I recommend you just try and get ships that have the highest health possible, and then try not to board the enemy ships, but instead just ram them as much as you can, and you'll get an easy win. But it is worth pointing out, you do have skirmisher options. They're basically pretty standard. There's a 80-man ship, and then there's a 100-man ship. But they're both archer units, so it means that you'll be able to burn enemy ships quite easily. And then for your admirals, you also have the 2 basically high-tier melee ships available to you, which is very nice if you want your general to be quite active. Then you also have a little tower ship, and then you have a scorpion ship. However, these 2 are actually very low on their ship health, with it only being 880 on the tower ship, and then on your scorpion ship, it is down to 501. So you basically want to be using these high-tier melee ships as your admiral's flagship. But basically, bottom line is, use melee ships when you're playing as Pergamon. They'll definitely get you some nice, quick, and easy naval victories. You have a pretty good navy overall. It's been a while since I've had to say that, so that's a nice change of pace. But anyway, let's jump on into the land units for Pergamon. Let's check them out. Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen, here we are at the military land units for Pergamon. Let's check them out. So obviously we'll be starting off with the general, as always. You actually have a lot of options for your general's bodyguard. You have like 5 or 6 bodyguard units. It's quite a lot. But I will just cover the cavalry bodyguard unit. That's basically always going to be your bodyguard unit, which is this bodyguard unit right here, known as the Pergamine Cavalry. They are a fantastic cavalry unit. They have 100 men in their unit. In addition, they have a very high attack, solid defense, in no small part due to their shield, which will be super helpful in fighting against skirmishes, which will be fantastic. You also have an awesome armor of 49. Bonus versus cav and infantry is fairly small, but it's still there. Weapon damage of 27 and a charge bonus of 48. However, you don't really have all that much armor penetration at just 5. And you have a speed of 6, so basically a very solid heavy melee / shock cav unit. You can definitely use it as a shock unit, and it looks, oh my goodness, look at that. What a champion, mate. You're looking fantastic, bro. Hang on, let's just try and get a nice angle. Here we go. The Greek units in general look fantastic, but Pergamon, being very unique, has such cool looking armor, and it's very cool to see such big shields being used on cavalry. It's not often I get to say that, but this unit will just be so useful for you in the early campaign. It will really be a diverse unit. You can use it to deal with other cavalry in melee combat, or you can use it to recharge enemy infantry. Super useful cav unit, but not too much else to say about it. As you can see, we have a lot of units to cover here, and this isn't even your entire roster. I will say that now to get it out of the way. I actually cut out probably about 4, maybe 5 units of AOR mercenary units that are available at the custom battle screen. Those include Cretan archers, Rhodian slingers, and then 2 different units of Galatians, although we do keep one of the units that's part of your core roster. So do keep that in mind. You have not only this large amount of variety, but you also have AOR merc units all around you when you're playing as Pergamon. So I'm not going to try to rehash that point too many times, but it is worth noting I did intentionally leave some units out. So we'll try and skip through as much as we can. That isn't really worth discussing, but as you can see, this is going to take quite a while. So let's quit messing around and jump on in. Getting into your skirmisher department, we get into the Pergamine Peltis. A very colorful, very, very cool looking unit. Very well disciplined, highly skilled, quite well armored at 35, which is very good for a Peltis unit. Actually isn't a lot to say about this because it just is what it is. It's a Pergamine elite Peltis unit. This is very, very elite. probably arguably one of the best Peltis that you can get in the game. It's definitely probably in the top 10 at least, if not higher, maybe top 5. It's just so heavily armored, has such good stats all across the board. The only thing it's lacking in really is charge bonus, which is a little bit of a shame, but it has good weapon damage at 27. It is also lacking in armor penetration though, which is worth noting. But it is a very skilled unit, and it'll be incredibly useful for you when you're going up against nations that do have high tier Peltis units that you need to outclass, such as the Seleucids. But moving on from your elites, we duck down to basically your low tier Peltis. These are your Pergamine Peltis units. Not a lot to say about them. They do have a good melee attack of 11, but their armor penetration is only at 2. So basically these guys are fairly skilled and they have a nice shield to help them block missile fire, but they have no armor at all almost. I mean, they have a small amount. Let's see the actual number. It's 8. 8 is their armor. So it's basically a low tier Peltis unit that can do some melee damage if you have to, but their charge bonus is pretty pathetic at 18, so I wouldn't count on them doing well in the charge. Then we jump up a little low to the Friggin Peltis. This is basically your solid core mid-tier level Peltis that you're going to get. Again, they don't have high armor penetration though. I say that because some nations do, especially some of the barbarian factions and Illyrians, Thracians. You see that quite often. These Greek factions though, they don't often have good armor penetration, and you're seeing it here. They will be very helpful with ammunition at 6 though, so they'll deal a fair bit of damage at range before they get in close with a melee attack of 10, weapon damage at 25. However, their charge bonus is really low at only 15. That's very low. But they have a melee defense of 14, although how much of that's just shield? 7. 7 comes from your shield there. So they are basically your solid mid-tier Peltis unit. You can rely on them to do well against most other units, but not elite units. They will get outclassed. Javelin men! Then we have Greek Javelin men, which basically operate the same as a Peltist, except they don't have the melee capabilities that a Peltist unit does. I'm still working on doing a skirmisher video for you guys to talk about the different classes. But yeah, Javelin men, you don't want to get into melee at all. They have a melee defense of 3 and a melee attack of 4, so those guys are pathetic with it. Try to keep them out of it. Then we have some very basic Greek archers, basically Levy archers. Try not to use them if you can use something better, especially the Cretan archers, which you can hire via Mercenaries. Then we have the Trolley and Slingers. Now this is a bit of an interesting unit. I mean, it's fairly low class, it's borderline Levy unit. However, in the description it talks about it being one of the best skirmisher units, and I can't really figure out why that is. It has a good armor penetration of 6, so it will do some decent damage against armored opponents, and has ammunition at 20, but that's pretty common for slinger units, so I'm not sure why this unit is so revered, at least in the description. I try to read all of the descriptions of all these units in like the barracks, and then check it out here on the left hand side as well. I mean, right here it says it's some of the best slingers in the ancient world. I'm not sure where that's coming from, but they're not bad, but they're pretty much still just a Levy unit. The main highlight of them is that they have a range of 190, which is actually very far indeed. It's not unheard of for a slinger unit though, so that'll be useful as slingers though. They're basically half a step up above from levies. Don't let them get into melee combat, they will get wrecked. But that's it for your skirmishers. Obviously you can see you lack solid slingers and solid archers, but you have very good Peltist options. But again, you have those mercenary options which will easily make up for that. Not only do you have Cretan archers, but you also have Syrian heavy archers to the east once you start invading the Seleucids. But anyway, moving forward, let's get into your spear department, and I've mixed up your hoplites, spears, and pikes all into one category. But do keep in mind you have access to AOR for these guys as well. Even the city of Pergamon itself, once you upgrade it to a level 3 city, you have access to some very solid core pikeman infantry. Should be very helpful for you. But anyway, let's quit messing around. Here we have your Pergamine Forex Spearmen. Obviously these guys will only be available after you reach Forex reforms, which will be quite a while. You have to wait until at least turn 120, and you need an Imperium of level 5 to get access to these guys. But again, just, oh my goodness, they're looking friggin' awesome. A lot of color, a lot of variety in shields. Look at the detail on that shield. That's fantastic. Just wow. Very, very impressive. You can tell the DEI team did a lot of work on Pergamon. That's fantastic. And one of the interesting things is that they have a bonus versus cavalry of 14, melee attack of 9, defense of 22. Just very, very good cav killers. They have the discipline formation and the square. Square can be kind of useful, but the discipline formation I wouldn't use unless they were holding like a really tight alleyway or something. But they also only have 200 men per unit, so keep that in mind. Because we come into the Ethereal department straight up next. These are the spearmen that will be available to you after, I bet you can't guess, the Ethereal reforms, which occurs at the minimum turn 50, when you're playing as Pergamon at least. These guys have 300 men in their unit, but they're basically a step down in every single way from the Forex units. The only thing that they have over the Forex units is speed. These guys have a speed of 3, the others have a speed of 2. But every other stat is better for the Forex units, so basically they'll be very good cav killers for you. They're quite mobile, however, the Ethereal spears do not have any formation abilities, so don't rely on them to hold the battle line for you. They can for a little while, but they won't get many kills against infantry. Use them as cav killers when you can. Then we move on to Forex Spearman. Now this is kind of an interesting unit because we do just have this Forex Spearman unit over here. I'm guessing this comes from possibly a different population class. Perhaps that's why. I'm not sure. If you do know, please comment down below. But either way, they're actually not that bad at all. Very good melee attack of 8, defense of 20, armor of 38. These guys are very heavily armored for spearmen. And they have the hollow square and the discipline formation. Just a very solid, I would say probably a high tier spearman. It's not elite, but it's high tier for sure. And these guys, again, look very, very fantastic. Although not as much variety in the colors, but that's okay. They don't always need it. Their armor on their own just looks really awesome. And they have a lot of variety in the faces. Shields look great. They'll be a very useful unit for you. But they do only have 200 men per unit. Moving on though, this is one of your general's bodyguard units, your Pergamine Royal Companions. This is basically the most elite your Hoplites get. This is a Hoplite unit as it has a phalanx ability. Again, just, oh my goodness, wow, those visuals, they look friggin' insane. That's fantastic, man. Oh gosh, guys, just, let's just take a minute to appreciate. Look at all this variety in the front shields. That's crazy. I don't know how these guys did it. These modders are just insane, man. That's super impressive. But what's even more impressive is the stats of the unit, which are fantastic. Armor 41, base morale of 49, so it will go up. Bonus versus cav 15, melee defense 21, and how much of that is your shield? 12 value from your shield, which is very good. It means you'll be able to defend yourself well in melee combat, but it'll also have a high missile blocking chance. Just a fantastic unit that will hold an alley or hold a specific line in the battle for you for a very long time. Even if they get outflanked, the high morale and armor will keep them in the game for a while. However, we then take a step back down to your Pergamine Hoplites. Not a lot to say about them except they look really nice considering that they're basically just a generic Hoplite unit. But that's what they are. They're a generic solid core Hoplite unit for you. But I don't know why you would use them instead of using Pikemen, which we'll get to here in just a second. But yeah, I'm not going to talk about them because I don't really think they're worth using. I've never seen an argument as to why you should use Hoplites instead of Pikemen, except maybe for mobility, because these guys can set up faster their formation. But even then, man, I mean, I'll have to like analyze it and do a debate video maybe one day. Let me know if you'd be interested in that. Maybe you could give some thoughts down below why you would use a Hoplite unit over a Pikeman unit. But they just do the same thing, but one does it better, really. But I'd have to consider that more. I'm sure some people have some interesting points. But yeah, let me know what you think. Then we have the light Hoplites here. They only have 200 men in their unit. I'm not going to say much about them except they don't have the hoplite ability, no phalanx ability at all. But your generic Pergamine hoplites do, so yeah, they're not going to have any bonuses from that formation. However, moving on, Pergamine Pikeman, the core of the Pergamon army right here, or the Pergamine army, perhaps I should say. Again, armor is looking completely unique for every single soldier, looking really, really awesome. They have the nice long Sarissa pikes. They have some very solid shields. In fact, they almost look bigger than normal pikes. Probably not, but those are some solid looking shields, guys, for a pikeman unit. Statistically, they're really great, although I'm surprised their melee defense isn't higher. They only have a shield value of 4, despite that shield looking quite good. That's kind of deceptive. I would expect that shield, which almost covers his whole torso, and keep in mind he's holding it a little low, to have a little bit more value, but it's a minor thing, it's not really a big deal. And the Pergamine Pikeman, solid attack, good weapon damage. Charge bonus is low because it's a pikeman unit, it's only 19. But the real highlight is their armor of 28, which isn't high, except when you consider that this is a pikeman unit and it is a core pikeman unit. This will be making up the core of your battle lines. This is not an elite unit, it's a mid-tier pikeman unit. But an armor of 28 will actually help them a lot because pikemen often die to skirmishers. Skirmishers are probably the most deadly thing towards pikemen, since they can do a lot of damage from the front, sides, or the rear. And so that will definitely be very helpful for you when you're using them in your main battle line, which you should be, because they're fantastic, very good mid-tier pikeman unit. Moving on, we have some Levy Hoplites. Almost nothing worth mentioning, except they do have the phalanx ability. They're basically a step up from the light hoplites we just talked about. Use them in lieu of the light hoplites if you can. Although again, they're not really going to hold anything for very long. They have an armor of 18, which is kind of surprising. I thought it would be lower. But yeah, that's all I have to say about that. And then you have your elite Ethereal spears. Now, unlike the other Ethereal units, this only has a man count of 200. Only 200 men per unit. The other Ethereals usually have 300, but these guys are very elite indeed. They have excellent attack, excellent defense, good bonus versus cavalry, which will help them boost their melee stats. And then they have an armor of 28 in addition to a massive shield, which gives you a shield value of 7, which is very good. So these guys, they don't actually have any formation ability, but they could still very well hold a battle line or section of the battle line for you. They're going to be too expensive and not really suited to being a frontline unit for you. These guys will be excellent cav killers, and they can fill a hole in your battle line if you need it, although that's not where they will shine the most. But it's possible, and they have excellent defense stats. And what I mean by that is that they have their good shield value, but they have a very good base value defense, which means that they're skilled in defense, which is at 14. So that's all of your spearmen. Moving forward though to your melee department for swordsmen and axemen and such. Here is our representatives for the Galatians in your army. You will have multiple different types of Galatians at your disposal. These guys are part of your core roster though, which means that you can recruit them from the barracks that you build. I believe it's the level 2 barracks. So that will be useful throughout your entire campaign, not just when you're in the Galatian region. They have a very good shield value. However, their armor is only at 10. Despite them kind of looking fairly armored, like this guy has his chainmail and such, but yeah, their armor is quite low. As such, they will be quite vulnerable to skirmisher fire. Do be careful about that. But their large shields should help them against slingers and such, but their main thing will be just doing damage, and their charge bonus is kind of low, but they're very aggressive with 11 melee attack, and they have a weapon damage of 26. So these guys are going to be a flanking force for you. I wouldn't use them as a core battle line unit unless you're really wanting a mobile army, but they won't last long in melee with such low armor and their defense being at 10, which isn't terrible, but it's not really core battle line material in my opinion. At least not when you're not even in a formation, which is, these guys have no formation, so use them as a mobile flanking force. Pergamine Forex Swordsman. This is the most elite that your swordsmen get, I should say. Although you do have the elite bodyguard unit here, which is actually slightly more elite. So yeah, beg my pardon. But these guys are very elite though. They are a fantastic Forex swordsman unit. They will be a late game unit since you don't get them to turn 120 at least. But that melee attack of 14, whoa, that is savage. That's very, very high. I'd expect that from Adricians, not from Greek swordsmen. It's very, very good. Weapon damage of 22, it's kind of low, but it's still fairly good. Charge bonus, though, is very low at 16. That's quite disappointing indeed. These guys will not do damage on the charge. They'll do damage, but they won't do their most damage on the charge. Get these guys into an extended melee with a less superior unit, or an inferior unit, I guess I should say. And they will do fantastic. They have an armor of 38 as well. Defense of 11, 8 of which comes from your shield. So they'll actually, when they're up against more aggressive armor penetrating units, they'll actually die. Not easily, but you might be surprised about how quickly they die to some units. So this is probably one of those units that might need a little bit of testing to really determine how good they are at defense, but at attack they're fantastic. I would use these mainly as a flanking force, get them to charge into the rear of the enemy. That would cut them down very, very easily.
Ready for orders.
Then we have Pergamine Ethereal swords. Basically, the Ethereal swords, you have a 300 man cap for each unit, and then they have basically aggressive stats with good weapon damage at 26, melee attack of 11. However, their armor is only at 8, so these guys will die very easily to skirmisher fire. Use them again only as a flanking force. Don't charge enemies from the front if you can avoid it at all.
Silver shield swordsman.
Here is obviously one of your general's bodyguard units, an elite bodyguard infantry unit, or what they call themselves as the Silver Shields. Fantastic, most elite infantry unit that you'll get. Armor of 41, melee attack of 16. That's insane. It's very, very high. Weapon damage at 24, which is great. However, their armor pen is only at 4. Which isn't terrible, but it's not really all that good either. So, yeah. They'll be doing a lot of damage against unarmored units, but units that are of the same caliber as them, it will take them a while to grind out. Which also means that they'll struggle against Roman units. So, Pergamon fighting Rome in the late game, you're not going to be wanting to use any of these melee troops. You just want to use your pikemen down there. But yeah, fantastic elite unit. The only issue with them that I see is lack of armor pen, and that they're quite slow with only a speed of 2. Which isn't terrible for an infantry unit, but because they're so heavily armored and they have these large shields, they will be slow to move on the battlefield. So make sure you have them in a position where you're happy before you start the battle. But yeah, that's it for your melee department. Again, no, I'm not even going to say it. You guys know what I'm going to say about having other options, but you do have those options. However, now we get to the cavalry department, and that's where things change a little bit more drastically. First off, we'll look at skirmishers. 1, 2. That's it. You have 2 skirmisher units available to you. Ethereal's cavalry, which basically Ethereal spears on horseback. They have javelins, they will throw them, but they only have an ammunition of 6. They're fairly aggressive though, so you can use them to chase down light enemy cavalry. But beyond that, there isn't really too much to say about Ethereal's cav. Besides, they have a speed of 7, which is pretty good. It's almost an 8 as well. You then have Greek Javelin cav, and these guys are the bottom of your cavalry. They're the lowest cav, tier of cavalry you get. Again, though, they're a Javelin cav unit or a Skirmisher cav unit, but they're not as well skilled or as well armored as the Ethereal's cavalry. In addition, the Ethereals have bigger shields, so the Ethereals would definitely be more useful and fulfill the role that these bottom tier guys would otherwise, but that's it. I'm not holding back at all in the Skirmisher horse department for you. There is AOR units nearby that can be useful, and you even have access to some Greek decent ones at the beginning of the game. However, that is pretty much it, except for one small kind of exception, which is where we get into the melee cavalry department. But first off, we have to talk about Tarentine cav. Now, Tarentine cav are kind of different. There's 2 new units of Tarantine Cav in the latest DEI update. I won't go through them both right now, but this is one of them. And they're basically a mixture of Skirmisher and melee Cav because they have an ammunition of 4, they have a speed of 8, which is very, very fast, but they also have an armor of 28 and a melee defense of 12. So they're very different, very unique, and they'll be one of the most useful Cav units you get access to. Not only can they fulfill a semi-skirmishing ability where they'll throw in a few javelins, not many, but they'll be able to chase down enemy Cav very easily and actually kill them most of the time. Or at the very least they can pin enemy units and buy your spearmen some time to catch up and get involved and wipe them out. So while it could be argued these guys should be in the skirmishing department, I think you'll generally find them to be more useful as a melee cavalry unit, chasing down enemy skirmishers, enemy light infantry, and enemy cav. And they even have a charge bonus of 45, which is quite impressive. So yeah, that's Tarantine Cav for you though, but there is another type of Tarantine Cav you can get, but I'll talk about that another time.
Cavalry.
Then we jump way the hell up to Pergamine Forex Cav. You can see I just kind of get these groups together based on their category, not on their quality, because we're going up to pretty much your elite cavalry that you get access to. These are Pergamine Forex Cav. As you can see, very heavily armored with an armor of 47, which is very, very high, especially considering you have a solid speed of 6, which is actually quite good. Melee defense of 15, which is a whopper. It's mainly due to your massive shield, but let's check out their skill. Skill of 9 actually, so that's very impressive. These guys will be excellent at basically sticking into an extended melee fight with other enemy cavalry. They can charge into the rear of enemy infantry and they'll do quite well. But these guys, even though they're shock cav technically, they're basically going to be the best melee cavalry that you get outside of your general's bodyguard unit. So use these guys in a melee cav role, rear charge when you need to, but otherwise focus them against enemy cavalry.
Citizen cavalry.
Speaking of which, we jump into the next unit, which is basically melee cav for you, which is Pergamine Cavalry. Basically the equites of Pergamon. They have solid stats across the board: attack, defense, charge bonus, they have it all. And they have a solid armor of 38. Wow. That's actually quite surprising that they have such a high armor. Nowhere near as high as the Forex, but with that large shield that these guys have, that's actually really, really impressive still. You're actually doing quite well in the melee cavalry department, even though you only have 2 dedicated melee cav units and then the Tarantines in addition, so not bad whatsoever. Which then, we could probably put this unit off on its own. Although all of these units here could be used to charge into the rear of the enemies.
Heavy horse at your command.
This is your dedicated shock cav unit besides your general's bodyguard unit, which is probably more of a melee unit anyway, to be honest. But yeah, this is your heavy lancer cavalry. Notice I'm saying what's in quotations. I'm not even bothering trying to say the Greek or Latin and all that. I'm not going to bother. I already butcher enough of my pronunciation with certain words, so let's just not bother. But as you can see, this is a lancer cavalry unit, which means it has no skirmishing capabilities, no ammo at all, no javelins, but it is fairly fast with a speed of 6, an armor of 45, base morale of 52, charge bonus of 56. So it's a very good skirmisher, very good shock cavalry unit, but only really in terms of being Greek. As soon as you go east of the Seleucid Empire and you start fighting Persians, Armenians, Parthians, even Bactria, they will all have way better shock cavalry than you. So the way that you're going to want to deal with that cavalry is either by using elephants, skirmishers, or by using your very good melee cav options that you have available. But then they'll need spearman support. So these guys are definitely not bad. And like I say, you can use any of your other cav to charge into the rear of the enemy. But this is the best it gets, besides your general's bodyguard. And you don't really have AOR or Merc options for shock cavalry. At least not instantly, like you do your skirmishers and whatnot. So worth keeping in mind, shock cavalry is really the main downfall of the Pergamon military. But it's not much of a downfall at all. As soon as you start going east, you'll get elephants anyway and you won't need shock cav. But that's it for the military roster of Pergamon. But that's the last of it to say about the military, except for the last two things, which is the reforms. I mentioned this briefly at the beginning of this section, but I'll mention it one last time. Your Ethereal's reforms, you have to wait a minimum of 50 turns before that begins. In addition, if you're playing this faction, you need an Imperium level of 3 as your minimum. Get to Imperium level 3, wait 50 turns, and you get Thurios units, which is basically any unit that has Thurios as part of its name. Furthermore, if you want to get Forex units, you have to wait a minimum of 120 turns. In addition, you also have to have an Imperium level of 5, which is actually quite large. It's not hard to get to it, but that's definitely getting to the later stages of the game. You're getting to the late game when you hit your Forex reforms, which is a bit of a shame, but it's also only 120 turns in, which is generally like halfway for most campaigns, depending on who and what you're doing, but how you're doing certain things. But anyway, that's it for your reforms. That's it for your Pergamon military. Now let's get into the part 3 section where we'll talk about the verdict of Pergamon. Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the part 3 section of this video. I really hope you guys have been enjoying this video. It's been a really fun, unique experience checking out Pergamon. They have a lot of fantastic looking units in addition to some great options to add to their military close by. Which brings me to my first point of this verdict section, which is that overall they have a great military. Even though you're lacking in some areas, you can make up for it very easily in the AR mercenary department. In addition, the units that you do have are all of solid quality, and you clearly have the lower tier, medium tier, and high tier types of units, which is good to have that progression because it means that you're not stuck without a certain type of unit until you get to elites, or maybe you're not stuck with only basically a bottom tier unit such as a bottom tier pikeman or something like that. Military overall is really, really good. I'm quite surprised how balanced it is actually. It's really nice to see. It's a good change of pace, to be honest. Often there's some really glaring obvious issues with a military, but this is not the case for Pergamon, in my opinion, besides the lack of shock cavalry. But then you can use all of your cav to do the same thing that shock cav can, and you can use them until you start getting elephants, and then you don't need shock cav anymore because elephants will do the job shock cav does 10 times better, 9 times out of 10, at least the majority of the time. But that's it for your military. To reiterate again, your economy is not in a good state at the beginning of the game, but it's not in a bad state either. It's basically going to progress fairly naturally. There are some resources nearby, but you do need to expand. Take all of Anatolia and either go east or west quickly, get those resources and get some trade flowing. But the economy shouldn't be hard for you as long as you build sensibly. Obviously, in most of your provinces, you want at least 1 or 2 cities that's dedicated to commercial buildings or industry. Just use a bit of common sense, really, and your economy should be fine, in my opinion. Moving on from that, though, next point. Strategically, you're actually in a very powerful early game position. The geography surrounding your city is very helpful and very defendable. In addition, your overall position on the world map is actually very good. You're in a position where you can go east and fight Persians and Eastern style nations, or you can go west, deal with other Greeks, and then you can go on and fight barbarian Dacians and Germanics. If you like, you can go in any direction you want, which is both a good and bad thing usually, because it's often a bad thing because it means you're surrounded by enemies. However, in Pergamon that isn't the case because you have a coastline to your west, even though you can still expand west, so it's very defendable and you have a lot of options when it comes to expansion. Speaking of expansion though, we then need to talk about the Seleucids. They will probably be your main mid-game enemy for the mid-game of the campaign. They're not really going to be too difficult, I imagine. They do use very Hellenic style armies in that they'll have a lot of Peltis, a lot of pikemen, some swordsmen, and then a couple units of decent cavalry. But since you're a human player and you're going generally up against AI, you should be able to outflank the enemy's skirmishes and cavalry and basically annihilate them. And once you do that, it should be a simple case of just recharging the enemy phalanx to death. So while the Seleucids will be your main rival, at least they should be in most general campaigns, they won't be all that difficult to take out, and once you do take them out, you'll have a very large population to draw troops from, and you'll also have a very large economy, and you will also be able to get allies to help you against them, as there'll be a lot of enemy factions attacking them, so use that to your advantage. Which brings me to my second last point, which is diplomacy can actually make this a very, very easy campaign. In fact, I would rate this a 2 out of 10 if you use diplomacy absolutely perfectly, in that you made allies with all of the people that you could, and then declared war on people who they were willing to fight you with, and not basically, I should say, break up your alliance over it. So diplomacy is actually very open-ended at the beginning of the campaign. You don't have too many other factions that you're basically forced to go to war with, like you are if you say play Rome or Carthage or something like that, where things are a little bit more obvious. But yeah, this could be a very easy campaign if you can do diplomacy right. Which brings me to my last point before we talk about the official difficulty rating I'm giving it. Late game Rome should actually not be all that hard for you. And I say that mainly because you have some solid mid-tier pikemen available, and pikemen will beat legionaries. They might lose in a one-on-one against an elite legionary unit, but that's after a very, very long time of grinding against them. As long as your pikemen have enough time to get their pikes down before legionnaires charge, they should be winning those one-on-one engagements. And that's just the infantry on their own. That's not even taking into account the cavalry you'll have by then, the elephants, the archers you'll have by then, the Peltis. You'll have a lot of support for your core pikeman units to deal with the Roman legionnaires. And I always try to make a point of talking about Rome, because in the majority of campaigns, Rome is the big baddie at the end that you need to deal with, a final boss for you to take on. And I think playing as Pergamon, Rome, while it won't be easy because they can throw a lot of stacks at you due to their easy low population requirements and all of that, and the buffs they get, Rome shouldn't be all that hard for you as Pergamon. I think you'll actually have a fairly easy time, especially if you get elephants from Syria. Go get those mercenary units, use them in your armies. You'll do fantastic. It'll be really surprising, I think, just how efficient the Pergamon army can be, as long as you get the composition right. It's up to you to get it right, though. Focus on pikemen when you're going up against Rome. Focus on other units when you're going up against different types of cultures. Just try to consider each cultural group you're fighting against. But that's my final point, at least until now, where we discuss the difficulty rating for Pergamon. I did say it would be a 2 out of 10 if you play the diplomacy perfectly, which basically means that, in my opinion, Pergamon is a measly 3 out of 10 with its difficulty. It should be an easy campaign for you. A 3 out of 10 is easy for me, a 4 is just below average, and then a 2 is a very easy campaign, and a 1 is just laughable. But 3 out of 10, it should be an easy campaign for you. You will have enemies early on, but you're in a very defendable strategic position. You should be able to use and abuse it against the AI, and then you can push and take out your enemies one at a time. Even though in the example I showed you, the Thracians declared war on me, they still have to cross the ocean to get to me. And while it's not hard for them to do, I'll see them coming and I'll be able to react accordingly. And even if I can't get an army to stop them at the river, all I need is a general and about 3 or 4 extra archer and cavalry units to defend the city of Pergamon, and I'll be able to hold off a full 20 stack army of Thracians coming at me. So just your early strategical position is so powerful. Really try to use that to your advantage. And this should be pretty much a dawdle of a campaign. Really, the Seleucids will be busy dying to Egypt and the Persians. Thracians will come after you, but they're only one hit quitter factions themselves, at least until the mid to late game. Late game, they could give you a run for your money if you let them grow big, but that's up to you if you do want them to become a challenge. But even then, you'll have higher quality units that will just crush some of the units in a front-on attack. For example, your pikemen will mess up their folksmen any day of the week in a front-on collision. If they rear charge you, it's a different story entirely, but they shouldn't be rear charging you. So that's it, ladies and gentlemen. That's it for Pergamon. Like I said, our next video will be a barbarian faction. Probably one of the Iberian factions, if not them, then one of the Celtic or Germanic factions. We need to give those guys a little bit of love. And then after that, I'm not too sure. We might do another Eastern faction. Perhaps we could check out one of the minor ones like Cultures or something. But then after that, we'll probably go back and check out Sparta or another Hellenic faction like it. Since we just completed a campaign at Sparta, I feel like I really want to do a faction overview for them soon. So, as always though, please do leave your suggestions down below. I hope you guys are enjoying the new graphical look of my game now. Please let me know if you have any requests or changes you'd like to see made to my reshade or to my game. Hopefully it looks quite good to you. But anyway, ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed, and I shall see you in the next one.